Welcome to the Personality Couch podcast, where we discuss all things personality and clinical practice. I'm your host, Doc Bach, and I'm here with my co-host, Doc Fish. We are both licensed clinical psychologists in private practice, and today we are continuing our series on antisocial personality. And I have to be honest, I have really struggled to wrap my head around this one because I'm having to deconstruct what I've learned in school, and I have a lot of questions still. So today is a little bit different vibe as I process with Doc Fish my questions of what is antisocial, what does it look like when it's not disordered, and how do we diagnose this without involving judgment and morals? I am really struggling here. So let's get to it.
For starters, there are a few main problems that I think make understanding antisocial personality really difficult. So one problem is that the DSM focuses on overt, observable behavior and criminality.
Yeah.
And ignores the internal workings of the antisocial personality structures. Now, antisocial behavior can be a symptom of many different personality types.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, not all criminals are antisocials, and not all antisocials are criminals.
Exactly. Yep.
So then another problem is just the line where antisocial personalities are actually disordered versus non-disordered is nowhere near clear.
Definitely not.
Yeah. And then a third problem is that we do have to venture into the concept of morals, which overlaps with philosophy and religion and not just psychology.
Right. Yes. You're touching on the points that I have personally been very confused about because it seems like historically we took this group of like the misfits and misbehaved and lumped them all together.
Mm-hmm.
And in history, judgmental labels included things like moral insanity and constitutionally inferior. I mean, come on, right?
I know. So those labels meant that their psychological makeup was inferior or like abnormal, which is technically very judgmental.
Yeah.
I believe it was Milan actually that noted the guy who termed moral insanity in the early 1800s was actually a major advocate for the position that those individuals should be socially condemned.
Whoa, like condemning these individuals based on their personality. So no, not happening. So then I ask, from this very chaotic, judgmental, value-laden place, like, what is antisocial then? Like, if we take out all the judgments and this like ickiness, like, and we don't focus on criminal behavior, what is antisocial personality?
Sure. Thankfully, I think the PDM-2 does a better job than the DSM in explaining what antisocial is.
Okay.
So I'll go through several key features. So antisocial is largely thought to be deeply psychological, like showing signs in early youth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's some evidence of perhaps having a more aggressive temperament in infancy, but definitely a higher threshold for emotional stimulation. Now, they often experience abuse and or traumatic childhoods, and they learn to believe essentially everyone is selfish or manipulative, dishonorable, and or weak. So this results in a fear of being manipulated by others, and so they have to manipulate first.
Right.
Often this stems from unconscious envy, and usually it's expressed through rage.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that from what I've read too. And the traumatic childhood piece is also consistent with what I've read.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also seen that they tend to have highly narcissistic parents.
Ooh, okay. That's really interesting because they can become stuck in primary narcissism where they're focused on themselves and their own satisfaction and like they don't get that others are separate from them. What is primary narcissism? It's actually something we all go through. It's developmentally appropriate in like infancy when as an infant, we're like, oh, we're super powerful. We're all powerful because like I'm hungry and all of a sudden I get milk.
Ooh.
And like we don't understand that mom is separate from the self. Like it's really psychoanalytic stuff.
Yeah.
But applied to being stuck in that narcissism as an antisocial, they might think like, oh, I can do whatever I want just to make sure that their self-interest is first, which also means they have to have all the power and control.
Right. Yes. And then I can see how this mindset can absolutely lead to running over people, running over laws, like really anything standing in their way as they are in pursuit of that control.
Mm-hmm. Right. The control and power is a way that they protect and defend themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And they learned it's necessary for their survival.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, so the PDM does give us a little bit more than the DSM does. It's not focusing on criminal behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And I do still have questions, though, about it, which we're going to get to as we go along. But I do want to say I can also see how this, like, I can do anything I want really could lead to criminal behavior in pursuit of that control, which I think is why the DSM picks that up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I think it definitely can, but it also doesn't have to be pathological. It could be something like, well, I'm going to go start this business regardless of risk because like I can, like I'm powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or maybe a mindset like this could guide their pursuit in politics or law, police, military.
Right. Religious leaders of mega churches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So these types, I can see how they would be drawn to positions of power.
Exactly.
Where they are presiding over others.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So in this temperament, I can see at maybe a non-pathological level, maybe all levels, there's at least maybe a countercultural angst in these types where perhaps they're going to push boundaries, cross boundaries, and question or stand up to authority.
Mm-hmm.
And they can be ruthless and reckless. And I think in general, these are very assertive, dominant types, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So then my biggest hangup is that difference between disorder and not disorder. Like that has to be a thing. Every personality has disorder and not disorder. But what does that look like in this type?
Sure. So like, where's the line for that disorder?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Okay,
you're going to make me go first, aren't you? So yes. Firstly, I used to think that the line for disordered was the DSM. But now I don't know because it has been pretty unhelpful with this disorder in particular, among others. But I feel like I just want to chuck my DSM out the window for this one completely. So I'm struggling. I'm not quite sure.
Right. And I think that makes me question, like, how do we even define disordered in general? And the DSM is pathology based. And it is like, what's normal versus abnormal? Because like you've taken abnormal psych class, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know where that line is.
Yeah. So to your point, what I think you're saying is like, if you don't define normal, how do you contrast abnormal against it? Like, what is a normal personality? So for antisocial, is criminal behavior the line for disorder? The DSM thinks it is, but I'm not so sure.
Right, because then we have to talk about the line involving criminal behavior, which involves morality, and morality isn't straightforward at all.
No. So then this brings in the question, how do we diagnose without judgment or imposing morals? Because, I mean, there has to be a line, right? A line that we can all agree upon. So maybe it's like, don't kill people, right? Like, that's not okay.
Well, unless it's your job in the military.
Okay, so you're playing devil's advocate here. But yes, if you have to do it for your job, right? But you can't just randomly go and hurt people because you're in a position of power.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I think that most people would like to say that the line would be like, you can't destroy.
Okay. And then all the things that fall under destruction.
Sure.
So the line between pop of color, antisocial personality versus actual problem in society, how bad do you think it has to be?
Oh boy. Okay. So we just talked a little bit about military. So like, we have special forces and their purpose is to protect, but also it's okay for them to do that elsewhere. But if they come home and harm civilians, that's controversy, right? Like, not okay.
Right.
So then maybe even more severe, I think of the witch trials, like Salem witch trials, but witch trials in general, that crossed over centuries, multiple places, countries.
Countries. Yeah.
At some point in our society, we were okay with like, oh, we're just going to throw this person in water and see if they drown.
Right.
Like that was okay.
And that means something about their morality.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Another step above that. I mean, we have Hitler. We have that entire situation.
Nazi
we can
Germany.
look back, I think, and say, this is wrong. But at some point in history, that was okay.
It was okay. So I think what you're saying is there's a societal acceptance that can happen with some of these antisocial behaviors. Like there can be a widespread acceptance of culturally or in a nation like that this is okay, or at least enough of a following that it takes the lead, like with Nazi Germany. Like there certainly were people that didn't agree and that were standing up, but as a culture, that became the forefront. And that's what we think of, Hitler with Nazi Germany and the atrocities that happened there. And then with the witch trials, that was really a folie à deux. That was a shared delusion that the people held. So there wasn't as much challenging there because they were kind of this group think, this mindset. And maybe there's these antisocial pieces inside of us that these leaders bring out, whoever the leaders are, of, actually causing harm on other people until enough people stand up and say, no, maybe another antisocial using their energy for good. Like, no, we can't do this to other human beings.
Right. And then that means that right versus wrong can't actually be the line.
No, but I want it to be.
Sure.
I want it to be. Yeah, because also these types can show up in churches as pastors and leaders, and especially mega churches, the types of characters that are drawn to those positions of power where you have multiple campuses, hundreds of thousands of attendees, global reach. The type of person that would be attracted to that is often going to have a heavy dose of narcissism. It can turn malignant. You can have these antisocial sentiments, this like against energy, and without accountability, that can cause serious harm to a congregation and to anyone who's kind of tuned in to what that church is doing, especially if they have a global platform.
Right.
But yeah, like where's the line? Is that disordered if this person is, preaching things from the pulpit that are horrible and terrible towards other humans? Like,
well, I don't think that the line can be harm to others because we harm people as a society.
Right.
So I think that it might be like a socially defined line and then that changes.
Oh, I don't like that. But I mean, through history, that's what the examples that you're giving, that's what you're saying, right? Is that like societally, socially, this is what we've done. Like an antisocial idea or notion or leader is accepted until they're not, right?
Sure.
So what a society or system deems is okay really depends on the zeitgeist of the time, right? So the social impact of personality and culture. I mean, that's been a theme throughout multiple series that we've done here. Like, yeah, that overlap is significant.
And then I do want to, complicate this even further. So there's also clinical significance. But then, like, who determines this and how?
Right. So, like, what makes it rise to the clinical threshold? Like, is it interference with work or social life or home? Like, that's the DSM puts that as the line, right? That interference. But as we know, some antisocials blend into society, maybe as like white collar gurus, right? Who push boundaries and maybe do corrupt things, but never get caught, right? So are they disordered?
Right. And according to the DSM, in a generalized personality disorder, right? Like there has to be distress.
Yeah.
There should be like an impact on work or relationships or some other area of functioning, which can include harm to self or others. Now, antisocial is a self-oriented personality. And so I do think that distress can fall on the other.
Okay. So example is if you're driving your wife nuts because you're an antisocial, is it a disorder?
Oh, Maybe. Probably not, but
Another example is like maybe you can have a whole worldwide trafficking ring filled with antisocial billionaires and they don't get caught because of money and connections. Is that not disorder level? Like, where's the line, right? Where's the line?
oh boy. Yeah, I don't think we know.
I struggle with that. Like, I'm not okay with that because this line has to be somewhere, which I think is why the criminal behavior has taken such a spotlight for this disorder in the DSM. And honestly, I get it, right? Because that is a clear line, if you will. But back to my point before, what if you don't get caught, but you still have criminal intention? Like, are you pathologically antisocial at that point?
I mean, yes, but also no, because you're making it work for you until it doesn't. So actually, this reminds me of J. Edgar Hoover, who was not an antisocial. Actually, he was a paranoid at disorder level. Well, but not really, because he was the head of the FBI. And so he made all of his pathology work for him and it was functional.
Right. So he was paranoid. He's a great example, actually. Yeah. So he made it work for him because he actually had filing cabinets full of dirt on everyone, like Hollywood, politicians, and he used it to blackmail them. But also he could because he was the head of the FBI, right? So he could camouflage into society. But is it not disorder level? Like, even though maybe it's still crooked?
I think that maybe the answer might just be like on a case by case basis.
So then we're back to the judgment question, right? Like, who decides? There has to be a judgment there. So maybe a clinician decides with their DSM that's imperfect, or society decides. Like, the social world gets to decide who's antisocial at the disorder level and who's not.
Right. And again, right, the DSM only highlights the antisocial behaviors.
Yeah.
Which could be part of other personality structures too.
Oh, definitely.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just thinking of the different characters that get themselves into trouble or that are drawn to these positions of power and leadership. And you can have the antisocial types. Like, I've definitely seen that as caricatures or even characters of megachurches in police, law, politics for sure. But then you also have individuals who are just narcissistic, paranoid, like Hoover was. Like, there's so many different flavors. And as we've been saying, not all criminals are antisocials and not all antisocials are criminals. So, and research tells us that most antisocials aren't criminals, actually. So, this need for dominance, though, and control, like that sentiment can show up in multiple different personality types. So, I already mentioned like the narcissistic personality. You brought up the paranoid, a great example with Hoover, right? So, there's power and control, but really it's coming from a place of fear and paranoia. And then there's sadistic too. So sadistic, wanting to cause harm on other people. But what then sets antisocial apart?
I mean, it is a real personality structure. Like, it's legit. I don't have any concerns about that, as I maybe do with some other personalities. But
sure,
antisocials go against the grain, like against society. They're thinking in countercultural ways. And so then it's like, well, is society going to accept it or reject it? At the non-disordered level, there may be just countercultural because of active self-focus.
Right. Yeah. So this is going to be different from your like kind of classic narcissist who I would argue is trying to blend in with society and fit a certain image. So they will go with the current that gives them the ego cookies, right? But then other dark structures like the paranoid is more focused on revenge or taking the pain out on others before they're annihilated.
Right. So they're going to be like, attack before I'm attacked.
Yeah.
And then we have the sadist, which isn't in the DSM anymore, but it used to be.
Right.
So sadistic personalities are actively focused on the pain of others. So not an active self-focus. It's other focus, but it's on their pain. So they're going to be upset and cruel
Right. As the end goal. That's the means to the end, or that is the end for them. That's what they want, versus someone who's antisocial might be mean and cruel, but it's a means to an end, and the end being control, right? But we don't always know what the motives are. We just see the behavior. And all of these types have a healthy or unhealthy, shall I say, a heaping dose of narcissism, often malignant narcissism. So you can see that flavor in these types as well. And all of these types can engage in criminal behavior, but they don't have to. So back to your point, that difference is really the core drives and desires, which we may or may not be privy to based on their behavior. Yeah, but these dark personalities are confusing. And I actually think we should do a differential diagnosis section in this series, because it's really hard to understand how they're different because they overlap a lot. And it's really hard to know what's driving the bus with this behavior.
Right. Like hashtag confusing.
Right.
And also, let's definitely look at those differential diagnoses one day.
Yes. We'll get there. We'll get there.
All right. But morality. Let's focus on that for a second. Morally, we technically do need antisocials in society. We need all of the personalities.
Yeah, exactly. Just like a Crayola box with all the different colors. Like we need all the colors. We need all the hues. And I'm just thinking of examples of maybe adaptive antisocial personalities. So Navy SEALs, right? Like they take risks to defy gravity and water and do these secret missions. And then I also think of like Secret Service agents, right? Like they are literally prepared to take a bullet for the president, regardless of political affiliation. I mean, like that's defying the odds, right?
Yeah. So antisocials are going to push boundaries and laws and rules of the land, and they're going to ask the questions, take names, make enemies. And that kind of makes me think too, like at one point, women couldn't vote. So sometimes we need personalities that challenge and push the envelope and do what none of us dare to do.
Yeah.
Like the stuff maybe other people are afraid of.
Right. And sometimes the ways that the world is operating do need questioned and need challenged. And we need brave men and women who aren't afraid to put themselves out there and to kind of lead the charge. And that reminds me, like with the women's voting, it reminds me of the movie Iron Jawed Angels, which is about women suffragists, and the types that are like Alice Paul and other really big personalities that were like, I'm gonna like hunger strike for this. I believe in this so much that I'm gonna go against even basic nourishment to show how much that I support and defend women having the right to vote. We need people like that. But then for me, the line is like, we need to use this power for good. Like, can we push the envelope for the greater good and not for self-focus and control? Kind of on the other side of the coin, this type of temperament in leadership can also go awry. Like it can rot and become pretty damaging to people and to societies and to our history as well.
Okay, so we do need leaders because society is set up in a hierarchical way. And I was actually thinking the other day, maybe we're transitioning out of a narcissistic society right now.
Ooh.
So we've been shining America's gold-plated shit for a while now. But everything is broken. And we know it.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, I think that we did elect an antisocial leader.
I actually agree. Yeah. As I was kind of reading and really, really trying to understand antisocial, that leapt off the page at me too, is kind of this antisocial sentiment in our nation in America. And yeah, absolutely. We've been polishing a turd and have always been kind of narcissistic. And I do think that, you know, if you look at kind of the behavior of our leader and leaders, there's almost this like, let's take a wrecking ball to the systems as well. But okay, so interesting. I do read historical books for fun. And one that I read recently is called State of Confusion. It's by a political psychologist who analyzed the American psyche. And he believes that our behavior now is a reaction to the trauma of 9/11. So prior to 9/11, we were kind of on our own protected island. Like we have a real geographical advantage here in the States. And outside of Pearl Harbor and World War II, like we hadn't really had a big ego insult like we did on 9/11. So he believes a lot of this behavior and divisiveness, polarization really came out of this unresolved trauma, especially as a narcissistic nation, right? We're not going to address that. So, but we're a traumatized nation now. And look what this kind of lack of dealing with that hurt and that ego insult is doing.
That is so fascinating. I could definitely see that.
Yeah.
And then we also have a paranoid increase with the pandemic. And so now malignant narcissism is prominent.
Yeah.
And then I think that makes it hard to distinguish narcissism from antisocial.
Oh, for sure. There's a ton of overlap with malignant narcissism, antisocial, paranoid, all of that. And the pandemic certainly brought out kind of an anxiety in all of us, a fear. And honestly, I think that we have elected a leader in whom I see both the malignant narcissism, paranoid elements, definitely antisocial behavior. And as I was reading about the antisocial, as I said before, the political mood of the times like really came to light for me that we are living in times of antisocial leadership. Yeah.
Sure. So Michael Stone's continuum of negative personalities does put antisocial as like worse than malignant narcissism.
Yeah.
But it also means that malignant narcissism is part of antisocial.
Exactly.
So the core is different though. And I do think our current leader is not about image, but it's definitely about power and dominance. So regardless of politics, regardless of all of that, what your view is, like putting your name on everything technically is narcissistic.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
is it about image? Or is it about power and dominance and owning and conquering everything?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. Or there could be an image element, but maybe it's secondary to the power and control. Yeah. So I'm also thinking like, a dog on a fire hydrant, they mark their territory, right?
Yeah.
Like some of that behavior.
Yes. Oh my goodness. So yes, we do need antisocials in society. However, we do not necessarily need pathological antisocial behavior in society.
No. So we need antisocials to better society, but not destroy it. So then I come back to how can we use this power for good?
Right. Well, so they're also going to destroy things as they try to better it. They are bulldozers, essentially, right? They're going to bulldoze the systems and the norms and the rules. And then, so like that goes back to the, is this good or bad question? Like morality. We don't have clear lines anywhere. It actually reminds me of Timothy McVeigh. He was in combat and he came back and he was essentially like, murder in war is no different than murder at home. But then he blew up a whole building with people in it,
right?
With the Oklahoma City bombings.
Yeah.
So that's not acceptable.
Right. But yeah, destroying things to make it better. I want to go back to what you said there because it actually made me think of a consultation that I had with a retired Secret Service agent. And she probably was an antisocial structure, seemingly not I don't know. I'm not going to get into disorder or not disorder, but the gist that I got of the meeting was like kind of tearing me down before she built me back up. It was a very interesting energy, but it wasn't destructive in the sense of like hurting me per se, but the energy was definitely a force to be reckoned with. But at the same time, this individual really seemed to want to help, but like about blew my wig off in the process. I don't wear a wig. That's the point.
Oh my gosh. That's hilarious.
What is this energy? Yeah. Big energy, right?
So they can totally come in and bulldoze in order to build back up. Like they are so intense. Now, sometimes it's super necessary, especially when there's crises. Like they get things done. Others may not like the process. They may not like what happens after there's the bulldozing and all of that stuff. But at the very foundation, like they do act.
Yeah. They're movers and shakers for better or for worse.
Mhm.
And sometimes we need to be shaken up and sometimes we don't. So, yeah. So this is where I come back to like using power for good. Like
Mhm.
for me, it's I have a clear line of don't hurt people. No.
Mm.
Like, but I also recognize your point earlier where it's like, but what if it's your job? Like, like
Right.
this morality, psychology, like my brain is just, it's too much. It's scrambled eggs.
Right. Because unfortunately, I think that feels like an idealistic line.
That would make sense. Yeah. I do have an idealist personality, so that fits. Mm-hmm.
That's okay. That's okay. But here's another line to think about. Where's the line with treatability?
Jeez, yeah, that's one I've been thinking about too, as I'm learning more
Mhm.
about antisocial. And this is another complicated one.
Mhm. There is a stereotype that, like, in general, as a class, antisocials are not treatable,
Mhm.
but that ignores severity and individual differences.
Yeah, I was taught that in my personality training. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I was thinking in McWilliams' book, she quotes Malloy's idea that the stereotype is actually a vindictive dynamic in society where, quote, moral judgment impinges on professional assessment. Right?
Ooh.
Well, why? Because antisocials write off others' needs. And so we just like write off the antisocials' needs.
Yeah. So our judgment of antisocials recreates their original trauma and furthers the dynamic that makes them who they are because we don't give them a chance.
I think you're onto something there. Now, little
Mhm.
tangent, like subtopic, where would the line be between like empathy and accountability then?
Yeah, that's also been a burning question for me during this series. So I am going to self disclose. I am an Enneagram 1. So I see things in black and white by nature, tend to be more idealistic. And I have a strong moral compass and sense of right or wrong. So having such a gray area, like a gray personality disorder that kind of butts up against morality, has been very, very challenging because my scaffolding feels like it's gone in
Oh,
this. Like my educational scaffolding is like out the window with this type. Can't use the DSM. Well, you can, but with a grain of salt. With other, you have to think about it a little more. But
mhm,
yeah, not just with that, but like it's kind of butting up against my sense of right and wrong. Like
mhm,
where's my line? What do I believe? So this personality runs that line of both right and wrong.
mhm.
And it's like, it's not my place to judge until it is. And then my brain just explodes and I stop and it's too much. Like
Oh,
the dissonance here is really substantial for me. Yeah.
yeah. And, one of the things that clinicians do need to face and make peace with when working with antisocials is their own antisocialness,
Oh,
which
gosh.
is super hard for some personalities.
I think I would be one of those.
Oh,
So you're telling me I need to lean into my darkness a little more, but
perhaps.
no more talk of darkness. Just kidding. Fun fact. Fun fact. I think Phantom of the Opera, I think Phantom, was actually a paranoid, hiding behind his mask with maybe some of the erotomania with being obsessed with Christine. Anyway, now I'm deflecting with songs and musicals, but
That's hilarious.
yes. Yeah, I think that's
Okay.
interesting, but that's not the point of this. The point is for me to get in touch with let my darker side give in.
Yeah. It's like we're talking about darkness. So you're just bringing in the sunshine. Well,
Well,
remember that one episode where we discussed the blinds metaphor? Like, because your blinds are so open and sunny and expressive. And so I
yeah.
do imagine it's harder to close the blinds and sit with the darker stuff.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Like I don't like going into the basement of my mind unless I have to. Thank you very much. And this episode has been really challenging to sit with some of these
Mm-hmm.
questions. This series has really. So I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I have cobwebs all over me, which
Oh my
is
God.
why I brought in Phantom of the Opera.
That's so funny. Oh.
So, how do we talk about the antisocial personality with empathy for
Mm.
both the victims, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because antisocials can do a lot of damage too. But how do we
Mm-hmm.
hold empathy for the victims and also the antisocials. Like that feels very uncomfortable. So my colleague who is not afraid of darkness, help me out here.
Sure. Well, come join me in the basement.
Into the cellar I go.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So multiple things can exist. So psychological and emotional pain is valid regardless of whatever behavior comes out of it. So I like to simplify things by thinking about children's behaviors, and I think we're all walking children anyway. But one child will stub their toe and they're going to melt down. They're going to seek comfort from their mama. Then another one over here will stub their toe and they're going to punch the wall and they're going to scream. And then maybe write their name on the said wall that hurt them.
Oh no, we went there. Yep.
So they both hurt their toe, and that's valid. But behaviorally, it's not okay to be destructive in pain.
Right. So that's true. Yeah. So the origins are valid. The pain is valid, but the behavior that stems from it is where there needs to be accountability. So I can have empathy for the abuse that often contributes to the psyche of antisocials. And I also have a moral compass and can say, don't cross this line. Like you cannot destroy in whatever form that means, like killing, tearing apart, abusing others, flagrant disregard for others or the laws of the land. Yeah.
Sure. That's actually one of my therapy boundaries that I address in intake is like, you can talk about and process anything, but you can't knock over a lamp.
Yeah.
Or as a mom, I can say, well, you can be angry. That's totally fine. You can't hit me.
Right. That's a great way to put it. Yeah. And this is where I actually think back to the original question, is it treatable? I think institutions, while imperfect, do offer a better chance for success for antisocials in treatment because those boundaries are fortified within the structure or hierarchy of the system. So the boundaries are baked in to the inpatient or prison system, for example. So if you try anything, consequences will be swift and immediate because the structure helps keep them in place.
Exactly.
Yeah. But in contrast, treatment with antisocials in a little private practice may prove more challenging, especially if we're talking disorder level here. So let's think about it. Antisocials have frequent contract violations. The therapeutic relationship is a contract. Like we have rules and policies that we follow, and you get treatment within this frame. However, there's nothing fortifying those boundaries externally. So what would keep an antisocial from stiffing you on the bill, taking you to court, or pursuing a license board complaint to have the final power play?
Ooh, even if it's suicide, because that does happen sometimes, as in like the end power is mine.
Oh my goodness. That I've read that. That is dark. Yeah. So it is risky treating more severe antisocials in an outpatient setting, especially without major reinforced boundaries. And I would say, honestly, your average private practice, just based on the structure of it alone, is typically not going to be adequate. And then further, most of us aren't cut out for it. Like, I don't think most of us who've gone into this field have the tools or the backbone, honestly.
I agree. Treatment does need to be incorruptible. Like boundaries cannot be bent ever. Bending or breaking boundaries, even in empathy, or maybe especially in empathy, will be seen as weakness.
Yeah.
Because empathy is not understood by disordered antisocials. And then as providers, this goes against our empathetic, helpful nature.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, I think your stereotypical therapist is the opposite of an antisocial, which can backfire.
Sure. Now, as a schizoid, I can detach from empathy and not show it at all. Like, I keep my internal empathy for the antisocial, but like, it's mine. They don't care. And I'm not going to let them see it.
Yeah.
But I do think a lot of therapists have a rescuer desire because they want to help. So it's really hard.
Right. Yeah. And I think some will go in not really realizing what they're getting themselves into and maybe lean too heavily into the empathy and empathize with them. And then that empathy gets turned on its head and they are exploited for the last power play. Like that can be a really dangerous dynamic. So, but yeah, the bottom line here is that some antisocials can make progress.
Some antisocials can make progress. Okay.
Yep.
Well, I'm going to leave us with a quote from a Danish psychiatrist, George Sturrup, in 1951. He says, "Don't forget these people. They have no one, yet they are people. They are desperately lacking and in terrible pain. Those who understand this are so rare. You must not turn their back on them."
That is powerful. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So to recap today, other than like antisocials are tough for me to understand. We know that, right? Like I feel like everything I've been taught about them is wrong.
Yeah.
But with that, I think we all have to get a little bit more comfortable with the darkness that's inside of all of us to be able to sit with these types. And honestly, that's not my strong suit, but I'm trying.
We've all got our boundaries, Doc Buck.
Yeah, we do. And limitations. So anyway, if you're interested in learning more, we also have blogs, visuals, and references that coincide with each episode at www.personalitycouch.com. And if you're a provider looking to consult about a case, or if you're in need of psychodynamic therapy or a deep dive psychological evaluation that's not forensic in nature, our private practice Quest Psych can help with that. I'll provide a link in the show notes. But for now, I am closing this dark chapter and we'll reopen it in 2 weeks. Be well, be kind, and we'll see you next time on The Personality Couch. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute a professional relationship. If you're in need of professional help, please seek out appropriate resources in your area. Information about clinical trends or diagnoses are discussed in broad and universal terms and do not refer to any specific person or case.